Arratsaldeon, buenas tardes, good afternoon. Mi nombre es Javier Laucirica y soy el director de investigación de ICA4. Me gustaría dar la bienvenida a todos ustedes en nombre de Innobasque, a quien agradezco que me haya invitado a moderar este impresionante panel de expertos que tenemos aquí y que durante 1 hora y media debatirán sobre el concepto de Smart Innovation, con la coletilla Hacia dónde va Europa, aunque uno de los ponentes nos dará una visión fuera de Europa, y en el que entiendo que se pondrá especial énfasis en destacar la utilización de metodologías participativas para la toma correcta de decisiones. Este panel estará formado por las personas que me rodean, más Adam Watson-Brown, que va a conectarse con nosotros a través de una videoconferencia. It's okay, it's connected. We can say that Mr. Watson is a coordinator in the Knowledge Management Unit of DG Connect from the EU. Good afternoon, Mr. Watson. Can you hear me? Hello.
I hope you can hear me.
Okay. As I was saying, you are coordinator in the Knowledge Management Unit of DG Connect from 2012 to 2014. You participated in the working group Digital Futures.
That's right. I participated in the Digital Futures task force, which undertook the Digital Futures project in order to innovate within the Commission.
We have planned to introduce the rest of the people who are going to participate in the panel.
Okay, please go ahead. Because I cannot see very well what's going on in the room, it's difficult for me to work things out. So just tell me when you need me to give the presentation. Okay?
In 5 minutes. Okay. The second. La segunda persona que va a participar en el panel de expertos es Albert Bravo Biosca, que es director de Innovación del Innovation Growth Lab en Nesta. Es doctor en Economía por la Universidad de Harvard, máster en Economía por la London School of Economics y licenciado en Economía por la Universidad Pompeu Fabra. Ha trabajado también como economista para la OCDE y es consultor del Banco Mundial. Albert nos va a hablar del concepto de experimentar para innovar mejor, que se basa en el objetivo esencial del Innovation Growth Lab, que es el conseguir que las políticas de crecimiento e innovación se hagan sobre fundamentos más experimentales y basados en la evidencia. También con un concepto de aproximación más global, involucrando, como dije al principio, a los máximos agentes posibles, tanto fundaciones, investigadores, gobierno, y que en esta investigación pueda permitir este método evaluar mejor el impacto de los recursos de los gobiernos y empresas que dedican a la innovación. Martin Duckworth es máster en Administración de Negocios en la Escuela de Negocios de Manchester. Martin es un estratega británico con experiencia en el desarrollo de nuevos mercados y nuevos modelos de negocio, especialmente buscando que los usos futuros del pensamiento y la planificación de escenarios permitan hacer una evaluación mejor del entorno y permitan desarrollar mejor nuevos negocios. Su ponencia se va a centrar en los resultados de un estudio denominado Strategic Foresight towards the third strategic program of Horizon 2020, en el que nos va a contar no solo las conclusiones, sino el método y los agentes involucrados, para explicarnos hacia dónde va desde el punto de vista estratégico Horizon 2020. Tanja Kimova es directora de investigación en TNS Opinion. Es un centro internacional de coordinación de TNS para la investigación social y política. Forma parte de esta empresa desde 2010 y es responsable de las encuestas en el contrato marco del Eurobarometro Flash, de los requerimientos de investigación del Banco Central Europeo y de su desarrollo. Tanja está matriculada en el curso en Estadística Avanzada en la Universidad de Leuven, en Bélgica, máster en Ciencias de la Comunicación y es licenciada en Psicología. Especialista en varios ámbitos como el diseño e implementación de estudios business to business y en la investigación online y de la comunicación. La ponencia de Tanja se centrará en explicarnos de forma breve, porque lamentablemente no tenemos demasiado tiempo, las tendencias en innovación en las empresas europeas que aparecen en el documento, en el informe Innovarómetro 2015, basado en una exhaustiva encuesta realizada sobre un amplio número de empresas que pertenecen a 28 países de la UE, además de Suiza y Estados Unidos. Y finalmente, Toby Shapshak dará la última ponencia. Toby es redactor jefe y editor de la revista Staff y colaborador con Forbes. Su TED Talk sobre innovación en África se ha visto más de 1,4 millones de veces, lo he visto también, y ha escrito artículos para CNN y The Guardian en Londres. La revista GQ le incluyó entre los 30 hombres más importantes en los medios de comunicación y ha aparecido en la lista de 300 jóvenes sudafricanos más influyentes recopilada por el periódico Mail and Guardian. Según GQ, se ha convertido en un periodista tecnológico más reconocido del país. Es copresentador de un programa semanal para la emisora CNBC África y también ha sido objeto de un artículo en New York Times. En su ponencia, Toby nos explicará, que seguro que no les va a dejar indiferentes, estoy convencido, nos explicará por qué, según su opinión, es mejor la innovación en África y cómo soluciones que este continente, muchas veces olvidado por los países desarrollados, pueden beneficiarnos, nos podemos beneficiar el resto del mundo. Getting straight to the point, Mr. Watson, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes for your presentation. And after this, we could have the chance of having one question for you from the public. Okay?
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk to you today about the Digital Futures project. And now, oh yes, I've learned how to drive this thing. Okay, so the concept for Digital Futures was to use foresight in order to prepare an innovative contextual briefing for the Juncker Commission. In other words, the commission that is currently in office. Normally, people who are going to work in the next commission, commissioners, they receive a big file full of paper briefings which explain to them what's going on. So the aim here was to arrive at a much broader exploration of the context. And we wanted to reach out beyond my department's information and communication technology focus, and also to reach out in terms of involving stakeholders by getting them to provide us with aspirational futures, so a form of crowdsourcing. And for that purpose, we developed a tool called Futurium using Drupal open source components, which brings together visions, evidence, policy ideas, and events in a social network style. So this was a form of experimental and low-cost engagement. Here is a schematic which shows what I've just said, through from citizen engagement through the creation of citizens' futures, stakeholders' futures, to key issues which would then inform the next college of the Commission. And here roughly is a kind of time spiral which takes us through the various stages of the project, beginning with the scoping and trial, a long period for engagement and co-creation, and then sense-making, which I will explain. So in terms of the mechanics of how to interact with crowdsourced futures from stakeholders, obviously the ideas, the futures, the aspirational futures will be coming up from the bottom, but we, as the managers of the project, needed to undertake some top-down sense-making in order to structure the content that was being received from the stakeholders, from the public, because there were many duplications and we had to provide a structure. So in terms of the outcomes of the project, we held about 100 participatory events in order to help create our community of stakeholders. There were about 2,000 or more of them in the end. We did about 20 webinars, and oh yes, we arrived at actually more than 4,000 Futurium members. 2,000 people coming to the actual visits, the actual events. This culminated in a vote at one of our research conferences on these top-level themes, of which there are some which are on the left-hand side are the ones that affect the whole of society, and the ones on the right in blue affect the individual more. So we had a vote amongst our research stakeholder community on which were the most important of those themes, which we had distilled from the crowdsourced futures. Just a little bit on the methodology here. So the trends and visions that came in were structured according to this schema. And here is an example of one of the top-level themes, which is the dawn of a transhumanistic era. What that means is that by the 2050 frame of this futures exercise, a transhuman will emerge where information and communication technologies and biomedicine will fundamentally improve the human condition and greatly enhance human intellectual, physical and psychological capabilities. Human beings' cognitive and intellectual abilities will be augmented through technological implants such as memory and energy storage. I will not talk about any of the trends that you see in the hexagon there, but they are, you can look at them later. And this is another one for the hyper-connected human, which is based obviously around the expansion of the internet. So I want to say a few words about the Futurium, which was a website that we built in order to crowdsource the futures. So this was the mission statement: to enable collective inquiry into ideas and aspirations of citizens. It combines a number of different concepts that we see in different ICT tools: social network, wiki, ideation tool, and foresight platform. The idea is to bring together both evidence and participation and connect them through the platform. Following the end of the Digital Futures project, we decided to continue with developing the Futurium as a stakeholder engagement tool. So what you see here is a schematic which shows the various different mini platforms that we have been running over the last 2 years since the Digital Futures project ended, and we delivered the briefing for this commission. So there's some of these have been more successful than others. I'm thinking it's in terms of how these communities work. It's very important to start with a community rather than having to build one. If you actually have to build a community from scratch, it's very labor intensive. We learned a lot about engagement from running Digital Futures, and also in a continuing way from the running of these platforms. Some of these lessons I've written down here for you. These are very practical and operational ideas for how to improve the quality of engagement with stakeholders and citizens. I should point out that all these experiments are currently only taking place in English, but we have some ideas in order to expand them, to use Futurium elsewhere in Europe. This is more on the design here. So that is my very quick overview of Futurium. I should say finally that we are preparing a version of Futurium which will be downloadable by local municipalities and will be usable by local municipalities across Europe in order to engage their citizens on policy issues affecting local communities. So that is in process at the moment. Here you have some resources which will explain in greater detail what I have just rushed through in a very short time. Can I pass the floor back to the room, please?
Okay, thank you. The idea is to have some answers at the end of the last, after the last presentation. But in the case of Mr. Watson, we could have a question now because he has to leave the panel. Do you have any question for him? Many thanks, Mr. Watson, and thank you for your presentation. Okay. Thank you.
There are no questions from the room, I take it?
No questions.
Okay, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your session.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Next, we have the presentation of Albert Bravo about the policies based on experimentation or data-based. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Gracias. Gracias por invitarme a estar aquí hoy.
Only one thing. Cuando terminemos las 4 presentaciones, habrá un turno de preguntas que acumularemos al final. Gracias.
Yo les voy a hablar en castellano, aunque van a ver que la mayoría de mi presentación está en inglés. Y quería empezar con una pregunta, y es, ¿cuántos de ustedes han escuchado esta frase, los experimentos con gaseosa? Y es cierto que quizá no era el sentido original de la frase, pero al final el mensaje que a la gente nos manda cuando hablamos de experimentación es que esta frase es con gaseosa, con cosas importantes no se experimenta. Se experimenta y se juega con cosas poco importantes, pero con lo importante de verdad mejor no experimentar. No sé si hay aquí muchos micros. El problema con esto, y es un problema, es que Si no experimentamos con las cosas importantes, seguro que no resolvemos los retos importantes que tenemos. Si queremos resolver los retos en distintas áreas de políticas que tenemos, hay que experimentar en aquellas cosas, no solo en los márgenes. Y uno de los retos que tenemos es construir una sociedad, una economía mucho más innovadora. Sí, que lo que yo les voy un poco a hablar en los próximos 25 minutos es por qué tenemos que experimentar mucho más en las maneras que utilizamos para apoyar la innovación, la emprendeduría, el crecimiento empresarial. El punto de partida es, si nosotros miramos cómo se toman hoy en día las decisiones de políticas públicas en este ámbito, pero también cómo se toman las decisiones en muchas empresas, tenemos básicamente tres ingredientes. Un ingrediente es la intuición, el instinto, el juicio, el judgment. Otro ingrediente son los datos, la evidencia. Y otro ingrediente es la experimentación. Si lo miramos como lo hacemos hoy en día, tenemos mucho de intuición, tenemos un poco de uso de datos, tenemos muy poca experimentación. Y cuando hablo de experimentación, conviene definir un poco lo que me refiero. Experimentación no es probar una cosa nueva. Eso lo hacemos cada día en muchos ámbitos. Experimentación es probar una cosa nueva y poner los sistemas para aprender si esa cosa nueva realmente funciona o no funciona. Experimentar, probar algo nuevo sin poner la estructura para poder aprender sobre lo que estás probando, eso es probar una cosa nueva, no es experimentar de un modo riguroso. Y lo que se ve en el ámbito de políticas de innovación y de crecimiento y de emprendeduría es que tenemos mucha intuición, a veces acertada, a veces no. Tenemos un poco de datos que se utilizan, pero se podría utilizar mucho más la cantidad de datos que se están generando hoy, sea los que están dentro de los gobiernos, sea los que están en las páginas web, los que están en LinkedIn. Hay muchas cosas más que se podrían hacer y definitivamente tenemos muy poca experimentación entendida como probar cosas nuevas y poner en los sistemas para poder aprender si funcionan o no funcionan. A ver este botón. ¿Cuál es el resultado de esto? Nosotros hicimos algunos cálculos mirando cuánto se gastaban los gobiernos europeos en programas de apoyo a la innovación, a la empresa, a la emprendeduría. En Europa se gastan unos 150 billones de euros al año en programas de apoyo para que las empresas sean más innovadoras, para los emprendedores, para que las empresas sean más productivas y crezcan más. El problema que tenemos es que hay muy poca evidencia del impacto de este dinero. Estamos hablando de una gran cantidad de fondos, pero realmente no sabemos cuál es el impacto que tienen. Un estudio de la London School of Economics miró a todas las evaluaciones que se habían hecho en este ámbito y básicamente encontró que solo un 1% de las evaluaciones de este ámbito satisfacían el mínimo criterio de rigurosidad. Básicamente eran suficientemente buenas y creíbles para convencer a alguien que no estaba de acuerdo contigo de entrada. La mayoría de evaluaciones que tenemos de estas políticas son suficientemente buenas para convencer a aquellos que ya están de acuerdo, que la política es una buena idea, pero no sirven para cambiar la opinión de alguien que está en desacuerdo. También si miramos cómo se hacen políticas en estos ámbitos, normalmente empezamos con un gran anuncio de un consejero, de un ministro, una gran política, sin haberla testado, probado a pequeña escala. El problema que tenemos es que no estamos poniendo grandes cantidades de dinero en una intervención que quizá no tiene ningún efecto. Asumimos que sabemos lo que va a funcionar en vez de reconocer que no lo sabemos y quizá mejor probar distintas versiones a pequeña escala. Para añadir un poco más de Lego, la alternativa a empezar con una gran política es empezar con pilotos experimentales. A veces uno se puede, si estamos hablando en el ámbito de la emprendeduría, para hacerlo un poquito más próximo al mundo de la innovación y la emprendeduría, puede ser que tiene usted un programa de apoyo, un programa de mentorship, donde da mentors. Puede querer probar si hay que darles 10 horas de mentorship o 50 horas, si durante 3 meses o durante un año. Pequeñas decisiones que al final pueden afectar al impacto del programa. Se puede decidir, cuestionar un poco, ¿qué pasa si en vez de hacer mentorship, que tienen un mentor, les damos 2 mentors o lo hacemos online, offline? O a veces decir, bueno, es que quizás tenemos que probar cosas totalmente distintas. El punto de partida es que en vez de asumir que sabemos cómo hacerlo, reconocer que no tenemos todas las respuestas y probar distintas maneras de hacerlo. La idea, hay muchas maneras de hacer esto. La manera que lo hacemos nosotros es aplicando el método científico, los ensayos clínicos, es decir, tiene un emprendedor o una empresa o tiene un programa de apoyo a la innovación, hay distintas versiones. En vez de empezar con una grande, empezar con distintas, ver qué pasa con cada una de ellas y aquella que funciona, la que va mejor, pues scaling it up, ahora es cuando me falla el español, implementarla a gran escala. El objetivo es que tengamos más experimentación, que tengamos mejor evidencia y con esto, si hay voluntad política, y enfatizo, si hay voluntad política, podemos acabar con políticas más efectivas. Porque uno de los problemas que tenemos es que realmente falta innovación en las políticas de innovación. Para añadir otra, también estaría bien aplicar al método científico las políticas científicas. Esto es un poco lo que hacemos en el Innovation Growth Lab, que es esta colaboración global de gobiernos de todo el mundo y investigadores de las mejores universidades del mundo, que tiene como objetivo cambiar la manera que se hacen políticas en estos ámbitos. En vez de hacer grandes políticas, ser mucho más experimental. Y estamos trabajando pues, con algunas, con agencias innovadoras, agencias de innovación de países como Finlandia, Teques. Estamos trabajando con investigadores de todo el mundo. Nos gustaría ver el País Vasco en esta lista. Los que Innobasque me ha invitado es muy consciente de esto. Para dar un poco de ejemplos prácticos de lo que eso significa en la realidad, él pensaba que podría utilizar los próximos 35 minutos para presentar algunos de los ejemplos de proyectos en los que estamos trabajando.
Quedan menos 10 segundos, menos 10 minutos.
A ver, que yo también tengo un reloj. Así que muy rápidamente, solo para que ver la diversidad de ámbitos donde uno puede experimentar. Este es un proyecto, por ejemplo, seguro que ustedes han escuchado hablar de eso, de la importancia de la interdisciplinaridad, de cuando se está haciendo investigación básica, de mezclar gente de distintas disciplinas para que salgan nuevos proyectos. Esto es un experimento que se está haciendo que básicamente lo que están haciendo es testando, probando si mezclar investigadores de distintos grupos y distintos ámbitos en un gran laboratorio generan nuevas colaboraciones. Lo están haciendo con una prueba, lo que sería un randomized control trial, un ensayo clínico, probando a ver cuál es el impacto de la proximidad y si esto realmente genera nuevas colaboraciones o no. Otro proyecto en el que estamos colaborando y trabajando es mirando cómo se puede solucionar este problema, bueno, un problema que tienen todas las regiones del mundo, que es, o que al menos se creen que es conectar universidades y empresas. Y aquí tenemos varios proyectos. Un proyecto que, por ejemplo, estamos haciendo ahora mismo con el gobierno británico es testear los vales de innovación, esas pequeñas ayudas que se le dan a las empresas, vales, cheques de innovación, para que compren inputs de conocimiento de universidades. Mirando cuál es el impacto en el corto plazo, pero también si esto sirve para solucionar la falta de relación que existe en estos ámbitos. La evidencia que tenemos hasta ahora, y es aún no tenemos el dibujo completo, es que son métodos efectivos para crear una nueva relación, pero cuando se deja de subvencionar esa relación, la relación no continúa. Lo que dice no solo algo del programa, sino algo del problema. Y es que el problema no es solo que no se conozcan, sino que una vez se conocen y trabajan juntos, quizá no quieren continuar trabajando juntos. Es un problema más difícil de fijar, pero al menos aprendemos algo útil. Tenemos también programas en los que estamos trabajando mirando cómo cómo hacer formación de emprendedores. Y si es más importante darles información de cómo hacer un business plan, un plan de negocio, registrar una empresa, o si es más útil darles formación sobre cómo trabajar en equipo, cómo ser creativo, cómo tener ideas, etcétera, etcétera, etcétera. También es otra prueba, también es otro piloto experimental. Otra intervención en la que estamos testando, probando ahora mismo, es cuál es el impacto de estar en una incubadora tecnológica. Hay muchas de estas incubadoras que se están creando. ¿Cuál es el impacto de entrar? Y en este caso, como había mucha demanda para entrar en una incubadora, han dicho, aquellos que no merezcan estar aquí no van a entrar, Pero entre todos aquellos que merezcan que estén aquí, en vez de tomar los 20 o los 100 primeros, haremos una lotería, unos entrarán, los otros no, y miraremos si al cabo de 3 meses, 6 meses, los que estaban dentro les ha ido mucho mejor que los que estaban fuera. Encima de esto, además, vamos a ver si darles mentoring o no tiene un impacto, y si darles mentoring sin estar en el espacio, sin estar en la incubadora, ya tiene el mismo efecto o no. Al final son probando distintas versiones de un programa que ya está en todo el mundo, pero que nunca realmente se ha evaluado de un modo riguroso. Continuando con el último ejemplo, este es un programa que hemos ayudado a poner en marcha al gobierno danés, que lo que están haciendo es intentar ayudar a las empresas de alto crecimiento. Y aquí lo que se está testeando es un nuevo programa piloto experimental donde, en un lado, por una parte, se les va a algunas empresas y les dice: aquí tenéis estos problemas, básicamente un análisis de 1 o 2 días de un consultor que va y les identifica oportunidades y problemas y retos que tienen. Y este es un grupo. Otro grupo no recibe nada y otro grupo dice: bueno, quizá no es suficiente con darles información de lo que no está, de lo que podrían hacer, quizá hay que llevarlos de la manita para que lo hagan. Y hay otro grupo que durante 1 año van a recibir apoyo para que implementar las recomendaciones. Al cabo de 2 o 3 años vamos a saber pues, si alguna de esas 2 intervenciones funcionaba y si es necesario acompañarlos de la manita todo el proceso o si con darles información de entrada sobre las cosas que podrían mejorar, las empresas ya reaccionan a ello. Me saltaré esta. Al final, el mensaje, digamos, último que quería enfatizar es que si pensamos en experimentación y en utilizar ensayos clínicos, randomized control trials en esta área, se puede pensar en muchos ámbitos distintos y de maneras muy distintas. A veces puede ser probar una política, como con el gobierno danés, de un nuevo programa de apoyo a las empresas. A veces puede ser probar pequeños cambios. Damos mentoring, no damos mentoring, damos un mentoring de 10 horas, damos un mentor, 2 mentors, pequeños cambios en programas existentes que ya tenemos que quizá en vez de implementarlos de entrada para todo el mundo, los podemos testar a pequeña escala. Y finalmente, a veces no es tanto sobre probar el impacto que tiene esa política, también es si, por ejemplo, tenemos un problema para atraer que las empresas participen en nuestros programas, una cosa tan sencilla que se puede hacer y que la mayoría de agencias de innovación del mundo no hacen es testar qué marketing funciona mejor. No cuesta nada, se puede hacer, pero no se hace. Al final, lo que hace falta, y con esto sí que ya prometo que concluyo, es un cambio cultural en las organizaciones que se dedican a apoyar a la innovación, la emprendeduría y también en las empresas. Primero, un poco de humildad, reconocer que no tenemos todas las respuestas de entrada. Segundo, un poco de ambición de querer encontrar la respuesta. Porque muchas veces el problema está en que no sabemos si esa política funciona o no funciona, pero por si acaso, mejor no intentamos encontrar la respuesta. Así que la ambición de querer encontrar la respuesta. Y tercero, la voluntad de continuar mejorando y experimentando y innovando. El hecho de que tengamos un programa que funciona no significa que no pueda funcionar mejor. Creo que con esos 3 ingredientes, que se pueden resumir en estar abiertos a nuevas ideas, pero sin asumir que van a funcionar, al final acabaremos con políticas más innovadoras y más efectivas. Así que la próxima vez que ustedes o alguien les venga con una idea de un proyecto que pueden hacer, en vez de guiarse solo por su intuición, su instinto, pregúntese si se puede experimentar un poco con ella. Es más fácil de lo que parece y si se hace bien, la respuesta puede ser muy útil. No solo eso, les puede sorprender. Con esto lo dejaré aquí. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. The following speech, la siguiente intervención, lo hará Martin Duckworth.
Good afternoon. I'm Martin Duckworth. I am an independent futurist, and that means my job is to help organisations think about the future. What I'd like to talk to you today is a project that we did for the European Commission to help support the development and evolution of the Horizon 2020 research programme. Many of you will know what Horizon 2020 is, but it is the biggest research programme the EU has ever funded. 80 billion euros of spending over a period of 7 years. And the program runs in cycles, and we're currently in the second cycle of spending. Now, the third cycle of spending is due to start in 2018, and the project we did looking at the future was to help support the preparation work for that third strategic program, as what they call part of the reflective phase. So the project that I'd like to talk about, the objective was to develop some views of the future that were relevant to Horizon 2020. They're not designed to make predictions, but to help stimulate discussion. And I'd like to talk about the tools that we use to help make that happen. We used established methods of foresight, and these are derived from the academic discipline of future studies. And it took about 6 months to do this between April and October last year. So it is already 6 months out of date. We involved quite a large number of people to do the research, but I must stress that this was looking quite broadly across the width of the Horizon 2020 program. I'm not looking at any specific research area in detail. This was part of the early preparation phase, trying to think about the future in the broadest terms. Now, there are 3 phases to the project. First one was, phase 1 ended with a workshop where we were looking at analysing trends of the future, and the output was 12 what we call drivers of future change. Second phase was a workshop where we looked at scenarios, and the output were 4 scenarios, different pitches of the future in 2030. And the reason why we chose 2030 was that we thought that any funding that Horizon 2020 would be making would take about 10 years from that funding to turn into innovation, to turn into social change. And therefore, it was sensible to look at what the world would look like in 2030 to help inform what decisions should be made for the funding in that third round. And the third phase of the project was looking at the implications of these scenarios and the drivers of future change to see what implications they would have for the Horizon 2020 project. The first workshop, where we started off looking at the trends from existing published foresight reports, saying these are the big trends that are going to shape the future. And we looked at them from 4 different perspectives. The first one on innovation and competition. It's obviously relevant to the innovation today. Sustainability perspective, and sustainability is a key feature of Horizon 2020. We also looked through social change, because social change was something that was not very well explored in previous rounds of the Horizon 2020 project. And a fourth perspective was radical innovation and radical opportunities to try and stretch the thinking as much as we could. And we produced, as an output for the first phase, was 12 drivers of change. Globalization is likely to continue unless there is a Cold War or worse between the United States and China. Demographics, we thought, would continue as the population ages almost everywhere, but Africa is likely to stay quite young. Environmental degradation is likely to continue, and the biosphere is likely to continue to be impacted by human activities. Migration, of course, is going to be an important one, not just for the movement of people, but the movement of skills and ideas. Urbanization is a trend which is driving a lot of the world, though not as important in Europe as it is in many other parts. Climate change will still be with us, of course. Inequality at the moment is getting worse, and whether that continues to get more unequal or less unequal is a big uncertainty over the next 15 years. And of course, there will be limits to resources and perhaps energy too. Other trends that we saw, the digital revolution is going to continue with more and more advances in that area. And the new one that's accelerating very quickly is biotechnology and medicine as new techniques are developed. The last two we thought were jobs and skills were really big factors, and we saw that certain parts of the digital revolution would be impacting those as robotics and mechanical developments take over from manual jobs. Artificial intelligence is starting to replace white-collar jobs. And of course, individual aspirations and empowerment, how people feel about things, would also be important. So these are the 12 drivers of future change that we took forward into the rest of the project. Now, the second phase was to look at scenarios. Now, scenarios are stories about how the future might evolve. They're not predictions, they're just stories to help people explore and to explore possibilities. Now, they're based around the biggest uncertainties. If I go back, I'd just like to explain. The interesting thing about the drivers of change is that we saw that the technology drivers seem to be quite predictable. The cost, for instance, of photovoltaic cells is coming down all the time. The cost of biotechnology techniques is reducing all the time. Moore's law is continuing to make computers faster. The uncertainties are actually in the social sides, about inequalities and values, about how they would evolve over the next 15 years. So we use these social uncertainties to explore how the future might evolve, and therefore see how the various technologies would evolve within those new futures. So if I'd explain, we had two big uncertainties that we used. If this square here is representations of all possible futures, then on the right-hand side we have futures where the objectives of society remain the continued economic growth and the pursuit of material consumption. Whereas on the left-hand side, you can visualize futures where people are much more interested in ecology and recycling and what they call the circular economy, using materials again and again rather than digging them out of the ground, using them and throwing them away. Now, another uncertainty was how society is controlled. And we put at the top futures where everything is controlled from the center, centralized and elitist. That's the top-down sort of society. And at the bottom of this chart, we could have different sorts of futures which are decentralized and participative, where ideas come from people at the bottom of the pile feeding into the center. And if you use this way of exploring how the futures might evolve, then we could have different sorts of social futures which you could explore how things might evolve. So in this case, on the top right, for instance, we described a future which we called Big Brother, which involved the continued pursuit of material growth and economic consumption in a world where everything was centralized. So if you remember, the driver I said was the digital revolution. In Big Brother, this is a world where when you go shopping, all your data is held by Amazon or the government, who already know everything about you and know what you want to buy even before you know it yourself. Now, if you think of the opposite scenario, in the opposite corner, all caring, is a very different world where you have an ecological circular economy with lots of recycling and a participative bottom-up world. And that would be a very different social environment than would be Big Brother. We actually had 4 scenarios. During the workshop, we had 15, and these are the 4 that we finalized for the next session. But the actual content of the scenarios is not that important. The important message is to think that there are different social futures, and the technology drivers are going to evolve differently because of the different social and legal and political and economic structures which you find within each future. Okay? So at the end of the day, we produced 4 scenarios to explore what might happen. Then in the third phase of the project, we took the 12 drivers of future change, looked at 4 different scenarios, and we looked also at the technology drivers, which we thought were more predictable, and tried to see how they would all fit together to create what we called 8 issues for the Horizon 2020 project. And these were the 8 issues. We saw that hyperconnectivity and big data would be driving accelerated change and innovation. We saw that energy is actually falling in cost and will be a huge game changer. Migration is going to be important as not only movement of people but movement of skills. Health is going to be a really big driver as it takes a bigger and bigger share of economic output and more possibilities of coming from the technology. Climate change is going to be with us all the time, so things like the climate change and management of the oceans are big projects which need global help, global responses. Innovation in the primary sector, how we make and use materials, is important as well. One of the big game changers is biotechnology, which is really rapidly accelerating. And on the social side, a state of instability seems to be much more likely going forward than it has been in the past. Now, of those bonds, I think of relevance to yourselves, you might like to hear more about 4 of them. And these are the 4 I'd like to talk about. So we thought hyperconnectivity and big data. This is the digital revolution. I'll read it out. Hyperconnectivity, the Internet of Things, and cognitive computing will transform our lives at a scale and a speed we can hardly imagine today. What's happening is that all these things within the digital side seem to be coming together. We're having learning systems, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, networking, social networking, pattern recognition, computer recognition, robotics are all feeding off each other and creating something which is very difficult to understand where it will go, but it is certainly going to drive the future over the next 15 years, if not longer. Oops. Right. The second thing we saw, and this was actually something that we thought was very new, to us, was quite new, was that the cost of energy seems to be coming down significantly. As solar energy and wind energy are getting cheaper and are now comparable with fossil fuels, even at the current prices. Going forward, we see those prices coming down. PV, well, photovoltaics are getting cheaper and cheaper every year. Wind is getting cheaper. And we're moving to a regime where over the next 15 years, energy for many parts of the day and in some seasons will be free. Well, zero marginal cost. The price may not be free, but the cost of producing it will be less than, it'll be available at zero marginal cost. At other times of the day, or in other seasons, it could be very much more expensive. So moving to a world where energy prices are going to be very variable and very different from time to time, variable from day to day and vary from season to season, which is very different from what we have now. So industrial processes and other activities and domestic users will have to get used to the fact that the cost of energy is going to change very much over the course of the year. Another big driver we saw is healthcare. Progress in medical science is bringing lots of opportunities. That's in diagnostics, in prevention, and treatment. And it's not just the technology that's driving. We see that healthcare the social attitudes are changing as well as people get more and more demanding of the healthcare system and of healthcare policy and requiring more policy, the increasing requirements from the people who provide their healthcare for them. And the fourth one that I'd like to talk about is biotechnology, which seems to be a game changer. People say that in the 19th century, 200 years ago, 19th century was the century of steam power. The 20th century was the century of electricity, and the 21st century is the century of biology. But what's happening recently is that it's no longer a period of a century that we're talking about. They're seeing new developments like gene editing, which means that things that you would take a decade to achieve with biotechnology in the past, you can now do in a month or a year or a month. Or things that would have taken a year in the past, you can now do in a month or a week. So the new techniques, particularly gene editing, which can make very precise changes to genetic components, means that all the things that were promised for biotechnology are now becoming available over the period of years rather than decades. And we think the sort of things that we're going to see is that we'll start to see specific biotechnology techniques helping to improve human lifespans and human health, and they'll be relevant to industrial processes where you can use biological things to create chemical change rather than heat and pressure, which you might use at the moment. They'll change agriculture and they'll change the food chain. And whether or not Europe chooses to adopt these techniques, they will impact Europe because the rest of the world is going to take them. So those are 4 big changes which we saw, which will all play out differently in the different scenarios, and they will be very relevant over the time plan for which the Horizon 2020 programme is thinking about its priorities for spending over the next 2 or 3 years. Now, the impact, the organisation, the sponsoring organisation within the European Commission that commissioned this work has told me that it's had quite an impact already. But of course, they would say that. They've been asked to present to 5 of the advisory groups, which are the groups with selected experts within each of the themes of Horizon 2020, and to 2 of the programme committees, which are the organisations where representatives of the member states and officials have been asked, are used to represent the interests of the member states. And the cross-cutting elements of the parts of the report have also already been, have contributed to the focus areas for the next call for funding. So the message is that the foresight, the techniques of foresight, the techniques of future studies are becoming more important within the Horizon 2020 programme. But what does this mean for the title of the presentation is Smart Innovation in Europe? I think that my real message is that innovation is seen as, considered as 2 parts. The successful exploitation of new inventions. Now, these futures techniques may not help you very much with actually inventing something. You need to be the specific expert in a specific subject to do that. But they will help to exploit it successfully. And they can do it by, the first key message is that this sort of analysis highlights that big changes are coming. And all the various factors I've talked about are going to change the world over the next 15 years in which your inventions and your innovations are going to have to work. So there's huge opportunities for innovators. The big change is coming. You can be part of actually making those changes happen. Or if you have another invention, you can exploit these changes in order to create value in other areas. Or, of course, these will be constraints. So if the world changes the way we think it will, then your inventions and innovations will have to work within those worlds as they appear in 2030, and not just as they work in worlds that we appear today in 2016. And I suppose the last message is that the tools of these future studies can actually improve the chance of success. And I've shown you some of the tools. Analysis of trends, which we call drivers of future change. Doing different pictures of the future, how the world might appear. These are scenarios. And pictures of just trying to visualize what the future might look like, the term we call visioning. So that's just a quick example of this SMART project which we've used, this project which we used to inform Horizon 2020. And thank you for your attention. There's a page here of credits and more details if you need to find anything else out. Okay, thank you.
Tanja, the floor is yours.
Okay, hi, and thanks a lot for inviting me to present this very exciting survey we've been doing for DG Growth over the years. DG Growth is part of the European Commission. And before I get into the content of this presentation, I would just like to say a few words about the entity. So the Institute is actually conducting the Eurobarometer surveys, and also about the Eurobarometer. Probably most of you hear about it for the first time. So TNS Opinion, the company I work for, was designed to serve as the Eurobarometer and was established around 40 years ago. And since then, over time, has developed to actually play the role of the coordination center based in Brussels and coordinate all the EU institutes that do national surveys. So it's in our DNA to conduct multi-country surveys. And through constant innovation and ensuring excellence in designing, implementing, and delivering accurate data and insightful analysis, we've been working with governments and the major EU institutions like the Commission, the Parliament, the European Central Bank, but also our clients range from large grassroots environment organizations such as Friends of the Earth, to Google and to communication agencies, but really most of the work that we do is for the European institutions. So the Eurobarometer, what is it in a nutshell? So if you sort of browse the internet, this is the thing that you'll find on Wikipedia. So it's a series of public opinion surveys conducted regularly on behalf of the Commission. That's sort of the definition, and we're sort of cited on the page. But let me give you a few insider information about what the Eurobarometer is and how it's conducted. So normally the Commission is interested to survey all the member states. So normally we do the survey simultaneously in 28 countries or more if they're interested, if the client is interested, the Commission or someone else is interested in other countries in the world. And once we design the questionnaire with the client, once we agree what we want to track and what we want to get out of these interviews, we have 3 days to implement the survey. So it means that from, let's say, day 1, the questionnaire is approved, our instrument is approved. We have 3 days until fieldwork is launched. And in those 3 days, we have to make all the translations happen. We have to disseminate all the samples to all the institutes. So we have to coordinate a huge network of people, 28 institutes or more, and many people, which makes sure that this all happens on the ground. And for example, just to give you an idea, because everything is then released in the public domain, and obviously the translations that we use completely impact the results. Every time that we launch a translation process, it involves at least 5 to 6 different native speakers, so all that fits within the 3 days, the scripting, the setup. Then we have 2 or 3 days to conduct the fieldwork. Normally we interview 1,000 people per country, so we have 3 days to conduct 27,000 interviews, to gather all that data to make sure that it's accurate, that it measures what we expect it to measure, etc. And then we need to deliver the data on the next day. So the day after fieldwork closes, let's say the fieldwork closes on a Thursday, we need to deliver the data on a Friday. And then the analysis will be delivered on a Monday. So the framework of the Eurobarometer ensures a very quick turnaround, and this time pressure is sort of constant for our organization. So we have to make sure that we automate as many processes and we involved as many innovative elements as possible to make sure this all happens and to make sure that the data we deliver is accurate and of good quality, etc. And then that the analysis is insightful. So we need to make sure that we have as much time as possible, so at least a day, to put together a brief for the client. And this is something that we continuously do, so it's not like a one-off effort, but it's something that we, so we launch telephone and face-to-face surveys back-to-back over the year. And we cover a variety of issues, but we mostly focus on social policies and political issues that are of interest to the client. And as I've said, so everything is available in the public domain. So everything comes under the scrutiny, obviously, of the client, but also of many academics, universities, NGOs, government organizations, the national representatives of the Commission, so the local representations, etc. And I just wanted to pick a chart to illustrate how powerful the Eurobarometer is, because, for example, this is a survey that has been going on since '73. Specifically this question, so what are the main concerns of Europeans? And this chart only presents the last 5 years. This survey is being conducted twice per year. And actually, the data is collected right before the Paris atrocities. So it's at the time when actually immigration started becoming a huge topic. And as you see from a non-issue, right from the bottom, it sort of popped up at the top, right next to unemployment. So it's really a very sensitive tool that tracks the developments of public opinion over time, and it's very sensitive to the major events that are important to our public. And you see that there is a rise for terrorism as well, but as I say, this happened before the Paris atrocities, so I expect that the next release will even show higher results for terrorism. So this is just to show you what this data looks collected over time and then put together on one slide. But specifically, the survey that I want to present today is the Innobarometer. So that's a barometer that is designed to track the innovation trends in all the EU member states. and one of its roles is to keep the DG, so DG Grow, informed about different trends and different changes in the innovation climate across the continent. And obviously this is an event dedicated around innovation, so therefore I don't need to say much about why innovation is so important for our economy, the quality of the lives we live in, and obviously for making the world a better place where our hopes and dreams become reality. So the way that this was designed, so the instrument, the questionnaire that is used to collect the data was developed over time. It was developed over 2 years with the involvement of the Joint Research Center here in Seville, in Spain, the University of Maastricht, and the expert group of DG Grow, and we tested it over 2 years, after which we stabilized the instrument, so therefore there'll be trend analysis starting from dating back to 2013 and kind of going forward. So it's a survey that we conduct every year. It's telephone interviews with CEOs and key decision makers of companies. The last fieldwork took place in February, and we interviewed companies employing 1 or more people. We covered 30 countries, so all the EU 28, Switzerland and the US, and the reason why we chose these 2 countries was that we wanted to benchmark the performance of the EU against these 2 major economies. And so over the course of a week, we interviewed, because it's a specific target, so a bit more difficult to reach. So over the course of a very short period of time, we interviewed 500 companies in each member state, and then that brings the total number of interviews we've collected at 14,117. So I'm going to quickly run you through kind of some elements. It was not possible to cover everything, but the things that I felt were most important and made sense for this event were the proportion of companies that innovate, what is their return on investment, what are the areas where they invest, why do they invest, what kind of public support do they need to continue the innovation and then to commercialize their goods and their innovative goods and services. What is the future of innovation? How much do they plan to invest in the future? And what kind of skills do they need to either support or kickstart their innovation processes? So first things first, so how many companies innovate across the EU? And this sort of slide shows you so the range. So the EU average says that 62% of companies, so 6 in 10 EU companies innovate, but actually the numbers range from 82 in Malta to 50 in Greece. And we can see that, for example, Switzerland sits sort of right at the top with the most, with the countries with the largest share of companies that innovate. So you immediately see that Switzerland is performing very well. So Swiss companies, there are a lot of Swiss companies that innovate, and then the US sits sort of right at the bottom of the EU range of companies that innovate. And then, what kind of profile do these innovative companies have? Who are these companies? So when we analyze the background data, we see that it's most likely to be bigger companies, and by bigger companies, I mean companies employing 10 or more people. The ones that have a turnover above €500,000, the ones which are part of a group, and the ones that report growth are the companies that innovate, or are most likely to do so. And then what is their return on investment? First of all, the sort of the numbers here on the right-hand side show you the proportion of companies that have reported some kind of return on investment. So on average, if they innovate, they get some kind of return on investment, and that's great news. So at least 8 in 10 companies receive some kind of return on investment, and these numbers are similar, obviously a bit higher in Spain. So Spain is above the EU average of companies that actually receive return on investment, but actually companies in Switzerland are the most likely to report that they have some kind of return on investment. So 9 out of 10 companies, so almost every company that innovates gets something back. And the most likely proportion of turnover they report as a result of the innovation they've introduced is 1 to 25, and this is a number cited in almost all countries except Switzerland, which reports where companies are most likely to say that they experienced 25% or more. So where do companies invest? Because to conduct some kind of innovation, they have to invest in certain areas. So, and this is similar across the board for almost all countries across the EU. So the first area where they invest, the most often cited area, is the acquisition of machine software. The second area is training. Then the third one is company reputation and branding. And then the organization of business processes. What we see when we benchmark the EU against the US and Switzerland, so in Switzerland, companies are just more likely to invest in all the areas, regardless. Just the proportion of companies that invest is much, much higher. And the companies in the US are much less likely to invest. And then where does Spain sit in all this? So it's somewhere with, let's say, with Switzerland. So it's just more likely to invest in all the areas, especially in the first two, so the acquisition of machine software and in training. When companies were asked what kind of public support do they need to commercialize their goods and services, and this is important for policy making, the first two cited areas were training staff and then accessing and reinforcing online selling, kind of acknowledging that the digital market is something for the future and something that they definitely need to tap in and exploit for whatever innovative goods or services they've developed. In Switzerland, however, the answers are very different. So the most often sought public support is to participate in conferences and other networking events, while the US has kind of a similar profile to this. And companies in Spain, they're just more likely to say that training staff is more important to support their commercialization of products. When companies were asked about their investment in innovation, the proportion of companies that invest is high. So it's around. So in the EU, it ranges from 85% in Finland to 62% in Romania. But even 62, it's a large majority of companies that invest in innovation. The EU average is quite high at 72%, and that's where Spain sits. And again, we see that Switzerland is kind of different and maybe similar to the companies in the EU, for example, Finland, that invest the most. So the largest proportion of companies that invest can be found in the Nordic countries and then in Switzerland. And then the US again sits down with Romania and other Eastern countries. And how much do they invest? So what proportion of their turnover are they most likely to report? Well, it's between 1% to 5%. And again, Switzerland reports they're much more likely to say that they invest 6 to 10% of their turnover in the innovations they conduct. So what are the future plans for companies for innovation? So we see that actually the large majority of companies, they will either increase the amount of money they spend on innovation, introducing or maintaining it, or they will just keep the proportion unchanged. What we saw when we made background analysis is that the companies that do not plan to invest or plan to reduce the innovation are those who actually either do not get return on investment or never introduced innovation. So it's really interesting to tie it back to the return on investment and to say that and I would allow myself a speculation that the companies that actually have introduced innovation, they are likely to either increase or at least stabilize the proportion of turnover they invest, because they know that there's going to be a return on investment. And the ones that have never actually experienced this return are less likely to do so, and we will see why later, but certainly they haven't experienced the benefits of innovation. So why do companies invest? When we asked them why they invest, the most likely answers were market potential. It was because they had to compete for at tenders where there was a specific request for innovation, and there was increased competitiveness in the market. And these are the three kind of most cited answers at EU level, but the two most important answers for Spain were market potential and then increased competitiveness. The companies that did not plan to invest are actually the ones who say that, well, investment is not going to be profitable, and they do not have financial support to undertake any such activities, financial support or enough staff, etc. So it's really important for the policy making, and this was an important finding for DG Growth, because then, I mean, whether it's profitable or not, they sort of need to go through the experience of having introduced an innovation and then see that it's absolutely very, very likely that they'll have some kind of return, and then the process will support itself. So there needs to be some kind of campaign to raise awareness about the benefits of innovation. But also in terms of financial support, there are different activities undertaken to make sure that companies understand that it's not traditional way of funding is not the only source of funding, and it's important for companies to understand that they can seek financial support at very many different institutions or spontaneous organizations. What are the skills needed for innovation? So most often companies said that it will be marketing skills, financial skills, and technical skills. So under financial skills, it will be skills that are needed to find access to finance. So obviously that's a huge issue for companies. And for example, engineering sits sort of at the bottom of this list, but let's remember that we interviewed companies that are employing one or more people, and we interviewed companies across a wide range of activities. So we interviewed retail, we interviewed industry, manufacturing, different services. So to them, these three activities are very relevant, and for example, engineering skills, which maybe comes to mind first when we think about innovation, we think about laboratories, etc. That's only relevant for part of the companies. Actually, companies that employ 1 to 10 people make 90% of the EU companies. So where does Spain sit with all this? Well, the results are similar when we compare it to the EU, except companies tend to cite marketing skills much more often, with 34% against the 24% in the EU. And I would like to wrap this presentation up with the future of innovation. So we asked companies thinking about the innovation they've either introduced or plan to introduce, what kind of impact do they think this will have on the future over the next 5 years? And most of the companies said that the innovation that they introduce or plan to introduce will create more jobs. And this was cited by so around 1 in 5 of EU companies, but it was cited by an even bigger proportion, so 1 in 4 of companies in Spain. US companies tend to say this, only 12% of US companies tend to say this, and then the most often envisaged benefit of innovation for Switzerland is lifelong learning. That's obviously, that comes second for the EU as a consequence of the innovation that will be introduced, but again, Spain sits much higher and much closer to Switzerland in this respect. And the other two issues that were brought up by companies were that the digital economy and IT sector will be enhanced by the innovation that companies introduce across the board. And then the fourth impact would be the positive impact on the environment, cited by more than 10 companies across the EU. Thank you very much.
Thank you.